Good day everyone and welcome to Slosh Mining. Hope everyone is doing well and staying safe. In today's video we will be covering the hash rates, overclocking and undervolting of these cards, the power consumption, as well as the mining software that we will be using, and the memory brand on each graphics card. Let's get into it. In this server we will be using a 1200 watt Anderson power supply. We just about got enough connectors to run these cards and risers. With this power supply we will be using the 80% rules to see what our maximum power consumption of each card. Just remember this is a 5 card rig, not a 6 card rig. Let's take a look at what the idle power consumption is. The server is currently using about 120 watts at idle. Let's find out what the balance of our power consumption that we can use for our graphics cards. To explain the 80% rule on a power supply, we've got a 1200 watt power supply that we will be using, and we should try not to exceed the 960 watts, which is 80% of it. We know what our idle is, which is 120 watts, meaning we're left with 840 watts for the graphics cards. Now, if we have 5 graphics cards in the server, we shouldn't exceed 168 watts per card. And if you had 6 graphics cards in the server, you should not exceed 140 watts. This would be the best practice for any power supply, working it out at 80% for the full server. Now that we know what we should not exceed on each graphics card, let's take a look at the overclock and undervolt settings for this server. As you can see, the server picks up all 5 graphics cards. Let's take a look at the type of memory that each card has, if it's Samsung, Micron or Hynix. I will be using GPU Z to take a look at the specs of these graphics cards and the type of memory that they have. We can see all 5 graphics cards. The first card has Hynix DDR6. Second card is Hynix as well. Third card has Samsung. Fourth card has Samsung as well. And then the last card has Hynix. The graphics cards with the Samsung memory were the first batch that I bought before they went out of stock. I had to wait a few weeks before it came back into stock. And we got the Hynix memory graphics cards. So we have all 5 plugged in. Let's take a look at what these cards can do on stock settings. We will be using MSI Afterburner. As you can see, all of them are set to full power limit. No overclock on the core in memory. The fan speed we could probably pick up to about 70%. So let's do that. Let's just make sure. 70%. Let's run some benchmarks. So let's do Ravencoin first. Just remember that we've got Samsung and Hynix memory, and it's not overclocked, so they probably won't run the same. The power consumption on this server at full tilt, without any overclocking and undervolting, we're using 1160 watts, which is insane. So let's drop that power consumption because we don't want to lose this server. Be right back. So as you can see, each card is actually using 200 watts. As you saw on the power consumption of the server, we're actually reaching almost 1200 watts. So I'm actually going to stop this from running because we don't want to lose any cards or the power supply. And let's drop it down, seeing that it's at 200. We need it to be down to about 170 watts. So let's get that down to, I think it's about 85 maybe. Let's try 85 and run our mining software again and see what the server consumption is and the power consumption for the graphics cards are. So if I'm not mistaken, 85% is actually the max that we can run these cards at, which is about 170 watts per card. So let's take a closer look and see what our power consumption is. So at the 85% power limit, we're using 990 watts. It's still a bit high. I think our calculations were at 960 watts. So we might need to drop it a little more because currently it's using just over 80% of the power consumption of the power supply. But this is the full server power consumption. Let's get back into our system and adjust the power limit on each graphics card. Currently we're using about 170 watts. This 840 watts is actually our power consumption on the graphics cards. Our calculations have been correct so far. We are getting 24.925 megahash per second on Ravencoin, and you'll notice that the Samsung memory is doing a lot better without any overclocks. So it's about 1 megahash per second better. I think I'll keep the fan speed at 100% for this demonstration, just to keep our cards as cool as possible. Because we're running Samsung and Hynix memory, we're going to be testing the core clock at minus 502 and see what our hash rates will be with this overclock. Will this benefit the Hynix memory? So dropping our core clock, we can see that our core clock is now running at 1100. The Hynix memory is running at 1000. And what's the other Hynix running at? This one is fairly low compared to the others. And if we look at the hash rate, you can see that because of the core clock on the last card that is lower than the others, you can actually see it in the hash rate of the card. The Samsung memory cards seem to have great efficiency, a bit better than the Hynix. So does it benefit these cards to actually drop the core clock to minus 502? Let's try overclocking to about, let's say 100 on all cards. Will it increase the hash rate for Ravencoin? Okay, so if we look at the hash rates of these cards, it's fairly the same. So it hasn't actually changed. And even looking at the efficiency of all these cards, it's probably gone up by 2 kilohash per watt, but not much of a change. What if we drop our core and our memory? Does it benefit either card? Dropping the memory does drop the hash rate of the cards by almost 1 megahash. Ooh, now we're really seeing the drop. Let's give it a minute to run and see what our results are. Okay, I think that's been long enough. Cards seem to have stopped at 23 megahash per second. Still using about 169 watts per card, 170. And the efficiency has dropped as well. If we look further up, it actually got a better efficiency. 148, 150. It's now 137, 140. So dropping our memory didn't help much. But before we start overclocking our core and memory, what will happen if we actually drop our power consumption or our power limit on each card? So if I drop it by 5%, it should drop by 10 watts. So let's try 80, see what it gives us, see what our efficiency is, and what our hash rates are. Okay, so we can definitely see the power consumption dropped by 10 watts to 159 watts. So from 840 watts to 820 watts. We are seeing our hash rate drop as well. Not by much though, because it was at 116 megahash in total, down to about 114 megahash. We are now under the 800 watt for the 5 graphics cards. Efficiency has increased as well, but I think it still needs to settle. These cards should be able to hit 27 megahash per second, but that would be increasing the core and memory clock. So let's get this test done and we can move over to that. Our efficiency is definitely going up, which is good. We are on 115 megahash for all 5 cards, using about 790 watts. This is not system, this is just for the cards. And our efficiency is at about 147 kilohash per watt. Let's drop it a little more. See if we can find a balance between overclocking and undervolting these cards. Power consumption is down to 149 watts at 75% power limit. Our hash rates have dropped a little more, not much. Okay, there we're seeing it now. 22 megahash, 23, 21, almost 22. This card seems to be a very bad card though. So let's see what we can actually do with the overclocks in this card to bring that hash rate up. Let's wait for this efficiency to settle. Definitely saving a lot more on power there. So we started at 840 watts. We're down about 100 watts for all 5 cards. Hash rate has dropped as well. Our efficiency is up. And remember, we haven't actually overclocked our cards as well. So maybe I should leave it at 75%. Or should we try 70? Let's try 70 before we move to the overclocking on the core and memory. Our power consumption has now dropped to 139 watts per card. Efficiency is looking a bit better. Hash rates are down though. We're down to 110 megahash per second for all 5 cards at 710 watts, and our efficiency is at 156 kilohash per watt. Let's see what we can do with 70% power limit. So what we're going to do, let's start with the core. Let's push our core to 100. Pushing the core clock to plus 100, we're looking at about 960 megahertz on the core. These are the Hynix memory cards. This one stops at about 900 megahertz. These Samsung cards are definitely running a lot better. Their core at 70% is 1400 megahertz on the core. So the Samsung cards definitely run a lot better. The last Hynix memory card is at 840, which is a bit lower than the others. The other two is at 900. So we might need to push the last graphics cards a little harder on the core to keep it the same as the other two. Okay, let's try 200, see if we get any errors. Remember what I said earlier, these cards can do 27 megahash per second. So we're still quite far down or below what we can do on these cards. Efficiency is looking great though, 165 kilohash per watt compared to what we started with. Definitely looks a bit better. We under 700 watts for the 5 cards. And remember, in my calculation I said that if we're going to have 6 cards, we would run all 6 at 139 watts, which is about 70% power limit on a 1200 watt power supply. Okay, I don't know if I should push the core any further, but let's try the memory at 500 and see if it makes any difference to the megahash on each card. Increasing the memory didn't do much for the Hynix graphics cards, but it did quite a bit for the Samsung, because Samsung is now running at 26 and almost 27 megahash per second. Efficiency looks great, but we're not seeing much of a difference with the Hynix cards. So let's push this up to 1000, see if we get any errors. I noticed that the fan speed has dropped. I think this card might have reset because it's running at 199 watts. So let's go back to that card, and it has. Let's just adjust these overclocks. Okay, so this one card definitely doesn't like these overclocks, but what I'm going to do is let's close the miner, set the overclocks, and under vault settings, and start our miner up again. Okay, so this graphics card definitely doesn't like those overclocks. So let's try. I will try it on all of them. So let's try 70. Let's close our miner, set our overclocks, and then try it again. 200, because I don't think it's really the issue with the core. 200. And I'm going to go 750 on all cards. And then see what happens. See if we get any errors. The Samsung cards definitely are better cards to get. So it's luck of the draw when buying these cards. I'm glad I was able to get Hynix and Samsung cards to actually test and show you. The core clocks on the Hynix graphics cards are definitely a lot lower than the Samsung cards, and I think that plays a big role in the hash rate of the cards. I'm going to let it run for another 5 minutes just to make sure that there are no errors and that these cards can run at 750, which I'm sure they can. I will probably drop it down to about 700 on the memory clock. There's one way to fix these low hash rates on these cards. So you've got the Samsung at 1000 and you've got the Hynix at 800. And one way to actually push up this core clock is to actually push up the power limit. So let's take this off and we'll push the Hynix memory up to about, let's say, 85. And see what our hash rates are. So we can do 85 as well. That's a Hynix card. And the last Hynix card is 85. Remember what we said about the power limit as well at 160. So that's just pushing the power limit of these cards to about 170. Let's see if it makes a difference on these hash rates of these cards. I don't know how many of you actually mine on Windows, but I find that with these newer cards, Hive OS and simplemining.net, the Linux-based operating systems do wonders for these cards when it comes to overclocking and undervolting. You actually use a lot less power and your hash rates are higher. And you don't actually have the issue of when Windows crashes. You can actually work on your server remotely. We pushed the power limit of the Hynix graphics cards to 85%, and you can see the difference, 27, almost 28 megahash per second. It is using 170 watts, you could say. There still seems to be a problem with the second card. Forgot to change the power limit. So let's change that and see what it does. And you'll notice that the core frequency of the Hynix cards are now at 1.5, 1.5, and they're running actually a lot higher now than the Samsung. Not sure what's wrong with this card. This card should be running the same as the others at 1.5, but it doesn't seem to get the power that it requires. It's giving us 27 megahash per second though. So the two Samsung cards running at 140 watts. The three Hynix cards are running at 170 watts. Should we do another 5% on the power limit for the Samsung cards? See if we can bring that up a bit. Let's give it a second while this runs. You'll notice that the Samsung cards are about 10% lower on the power limit, but the hash rate is the same as the Hynix cards. We've got the Hynix cards at 85% power limit. We've got the Samsung cards at 75% power limit, and the hash rates are exactly the same. So the Samsung cards are definitely better, and it uses a lot less power. I will end this video here. I know it has been a little long, but we'll continue on our next video with maybe covering NiceHash. Let me know down in the comments below what your overclocks for your graphics cards are, specifically for the RTX 3060 Ti LHR version, and what memory you have with the overclocks that you are running. So we're looking at the power limit, what power limit you will be using, what's your overclock on your core and memory, and your hash rate that you're getting. Looking forward to seeing your comments. Before I go, let me just show you the power consumption of the rig. I know the cards are not running all the same, but they are running at about 27, 28 megahash per second. So we're getting about 139 megahash per second at about 800 watts. So let me show you what we're running on our server. Okay, so our full server is currently running at 940 watts. Our 80% rule was 960 watts, so we're definitely under that. and our server seems to be running stable with those overclocks and undervolts. Stay tuned for our next video as we cover NiceHash, Hive OS and SMOS. Please don't forget to like, subscribe and hit that notification bell to stay up to date with upcoming videos. Thank you for watching. Catch you on the next video. Ciao for now.